Alright, where were we? The early 2010s was a slow time period in the history of God of War speedrunning. In fact, there were almost no active runners, but this didn't mean everyone was asleep. Glitching and routing of the God of War series continued as usual, and the late 2012 and early 2013 was like a small glitching renaissance for the game. Among the discoveries were new high jump techniques, as well as increasingly drastic applications of the so-called swimming glitch, which was basically Kratos swimming outside water. After VPZone did the last known segmented in-game time run of God of War at the very end of 2013, the next new runners would emerge more than half a year later, in the autumn of 2014. But at that point, speedrunning itself had changed. Live streaming was now common. Moreover, runs that were timed in real time and done single segment seemed to work the best in a live context. Practically every God of War runner from now on would use this new format. And with it came new rules. The timing in real-time runs started from choosing new game in the main menu and ended upon sitting on the throne in Olympus at the very end of the game. It was hard to compare runs that came before 2013 with runs that came after. God of War's in-game timer stopped counting during cutscenes and menus, and the old segmented runs had an inherent advantage over single-segment runs as well. If you had to try to approximate, Shenmunu's classic 105 run might be around 140 after converting into real time, since all the cutscenes and menus added around 30 to 35 minutes. But it still wasn't quite as simple as that. Speedrunners of this new era now had a real incentive to minimize time spent in the menu or inside cutscenes, which also influenced the route itself. Upgrading Kratos' gear was a pretty slow action in God of War, so upgrading routes became even more minimalist than before, and several new skips were devised for the sole purpose of going around triggers of pre-rendered cutscenes. But maybe I'm getting ahead of myself. For now, let's return our focus to the autumn of 2014, when two new runners posted in the SDA thread. On the same day, no less. The first of them was Kazumiyumi. He said he had done a real-time run on easy difficulty in a marathon setting, getting a time of 2:21. Let's have a quick look at it. Kazumiyumi's original forum post said that he did this run at 3 AM with very little sleep. The empty splits, full of woeful misspellings, were probably made on location just a little before the run. Apparently, Kazumiyumi had only learned some of the existing speed tactics for the game, making his run a peculiar mishmash of good, bad, and occasionally just plain strange. As one positive example, he did Tyrju's small Hydra heads skip and dealt with big Hydra with relative finesse, even managing to pull off a frame-precise health regen cancel once. But as for tactics that would have been questionable even in 2005, instead of dealing with Minotaurs with an elegant loop of air grabs, he aimlessly slashed at them with blades. For the most part, this run displayed a type of a beginner or intermediate speedrun route through the game. Medusa's Gaze tutorial was escape to get regenerating magic, of course. A lot of other skips were done too, but only the ones that were simple to perform. Skips which only required a plain high jump or two. Kazumiyumi fought the Siren boss fight using Rage of the Gods at first. This seemed to kill the Sirens faster than using level 1 Medusa's Gaze, so it wasn't a bad idea in principle. Unfortunately, Kratos didn't have enough rage to defeat all the Sirens, so switching to magic afterwards was still necessary. When doing some skips, like the main Challenge of Hades skip, the runner used Blade of Artemis high jumps instead of faster, regular high jumps. This type of an over-reliance on Blade of Artemis was probably due to how simple these high jumps were to do. It was just a Blade of Artemis air combo that you repeated over and over again without anything too intricate about the timing. Kazumiyumi fought Pandora's Guardian without additional upgrades, slowly chipping away the boss's health with his level 2 blades and level 1 Poseidon's Rage. Even though the game was set on easy, this took a while. Late game, Kazumiyumi's main source of damage was Army of Hades level 2. He still hadn't upgraded Poseidon's Rage at all, possibly to ensure that he would have enough red orbs to max out Army of Hades before Ares. By the clone fight, I simply had to give up trying to understand Kazumiyumi's upgrading routes. He still adamantly refused to upgrade blades or the magics to increase his damage output, almost like some self-imposed challenge. And that was Kazumiyumi's real-time attack of God of War. The run was clearly a work in progress, but still it stands out for being the chronologically first recorded God of War RTA, as well as the first run of God of War ever done in a marathon setting. The second runner who appeared in the Speed Demos archive thread was EXE. In his post, he said he had started practicing the game about 2 weeks earlier, and that his personal best was currently 2:15. However, he had played a different category than Kazumiyumi. EXE has said that he always prefers doing the fastest possible categories in any game he speedruns. In the case of God of War, he gravitated towards runs that were done on easy mode while using a special costume. He proposed the following distinction: New Game runs are without costume, New Game Plus runs are with costume. Most God of War games have a separate New Game Plus mode in which Kratos gets to start his adventure with most of the gear and upgrades already unlocked. While the original God of War did not have such a mode, using a special costume to become overpowered was pretty close to this in spirit, so calling costume runs New Game Plus became the accepted convention. Over the course of 2 months, EXE streamed 3 times a week, grinding hard to improve his own times. There was no competition at all since Kazumiyumi had seemingly retired from speedrunning right after his debut run, leaving EXE free to break the world record at least 6 consecutive times.
Wow! Yeah! Yeah! Oh my god! Oh my god! Wow! Wow! Bam!
Master, you can do it.
Come on. Okay!
Yeah!
Wow!
Yippee!
Sub 146.30! Wow! Yeah!
Yeah!
On 14th of November 2014, he had taken his time down from 2:15 to 1:44. All of these runs were done on the fastest possible category, which meant easy mode and also using the special costume, Tychonius. EXE had used VPSOne's 2013 run as a reference, since it was the first run that was done in these conditions. The Tychonius costume gave Kratos twice the attack power. He was so strong in this category that it was possible to skip the Hydra 1 minigame by just continuing to attack the boss while it was stunned. The big drawback of Tychonius was that Kratos' defense became terrible. It was like a high-risk, high-reward costume. Having a bad defense shouldn't usually matter that much in a speedrun, but a careless player could still get killed in this category. Kratos' power was so high that it was much faster to use melee attacks than get grabbed by the boss, completely changing the dynamic of this fight from what it usually was. The small box pushing section afterwards could now be skipped with a basic high jump. This trick was PlayStation 3 only. Perhaps this version had a slightly more lenient gravity. Still, the trick was almost frame precise to pull off. EXE needed 3 attempts to get it to work. At the boss fight of AKheon, the small Hydra heads were skipped as usual. Since Tychonius got 4 times the red orbs, it was possible to upgrade Blades of Chaos to level 2 before the big Hydra, then destroy it in seconds using Rage of the Gods. This was a tactic unique to this category only. Instead of doing the sex minigame, EXE decided to get red orbs by opening various chests while progressing through Athens. Next part of the game looked quite different from any previous runs. First, EXE got Kratos checkpointed while hanging on a ledge, and then retried from the last checkpoints. Doing this made Kratos fall down past the ship's loading zone, allowing him to roam freely under the water surface. Normally Kratos couldn't dive before acquiring Poseidon's trident from Challenge of Poseidon. Not being able to dive also prevented players from acquiring swimming glitch from this area early. However, it was discovered in 2012 that collision that was overlaying water in a specific way could push Kratos under the water surface, putting him into free dive mode even without the trident. Armed with this knowledge, it was Satvara who found a suitable spot to start swimming glitch underneath one of the piers. Kratos could now swim past all obstacles in the early game, theoretically all the way to the sewers of Athens. But runners really needed to get regen magic, and so they had to end the swimming glitch early. EXE only swam up to Medusa and then ended swimming by getting Kratos stone frozen near the ground level. Normally being frozen in air would shatter Kratos upon landing, but it was possible to land safely on sloped floor like this, and from there continue on like normal. After getting regen magic, it was time for the Gates of Athens skip. EXE felt like this was one of the hardest skips in the game due to the blind platforming involved, but on this run he got it first try.
First try, yeah!
It seemed as if the rest of the early game route was pretty much set in stone. EXE bypassed almost everything in Athens with the same series of skips that was already seen in Shenminius' run back in 2008. EXE managed to gather 3000 red orbs before reaching the desert. He used them to upgrade Medusa's gaze to level 2, since it was one of the most effective ways to deal with the Siren boss fight. This upgrade helped later in Pandora's Temple too, for instance in the Wraith fight that awaited right after stepping into the temple lobby. Most of Challenge of Atlas was skipped with Blade of Artemis jumps. However, since this was single segment, EXE used an easier version of the first skip and only jumped up to the Saw room instead of going all the way to the adjacent corridor too. While climbing up to Challenge of Poseidon, EXE stopped and almost upgraded Blades of Chaos to level 3. He stopped just few tens of orbs short of a new upgrade. What madness was this?
Okay.
In fact, EXE had just set up something called Blackout Glitch. If you upgrade blades to next level and then retry from the last checkpoint, for several seconds after the game resumes, Kratos is free to move although the screen is still dark. None of the level triggers can activate during this time, so Kratos can slip past fights unnoticed. EXE used this glitch to go past a trigger near the entrance, skipping a cutscene as well as the first fight against Cerberus.
That was really important. Whoa!
EXE could skip getting the crank at the start of the sacrifice level by high jumping up to the cage and pushing it off its invisible pedestal. Afterwards, Medusa's gaze level 2 and its special move, Gorgon Flash, once again proved most helpful when fending off the numerous legionnaire captains. The rest of Challenge of Poseidon was skipped with Blade of Artemis jumps and also swimming through a large part of it out of bounds. The worst part about doing this skip was the camera, which did a lot of uncontrollable movement when swimming close to the level. It was easy to end up back in bounds by accident, but going further away from the level geometry wasn't an option either, since you had to hit a few loading triggers too while doing all this. Since EXE had spent his Rage of the Gods at the big Hydra, he couldn't use the most direct method of skipping the Archer rope in Challenge of Hades. Instead, he decided to fight the Minotaurs and the Archers, which fortunately didn't take very long thanks to his endless magic and boosted power. A new big exploit had been discovered in the Pandora's Guardian fights. You had to shoot one log that misses at the start of the fights. After that, if you continued shooting more logs, each at a precise time, you would glitch up the boss, forcing it to walk into your every shot, thus skipping almost all the phases of the fights. The timing for this trick was fairly precise, and if you missed even once, it was more convenient to just reset the entire fight to get another try. Also, if you did this glitch too many times, that would make the fight unwinnable. EXE then finished off the boss with level 1 Blade of Artemis. Thanks to all his extra red orbs, a Tychonius Kratos could easily upgrade Army of Hades to level 3 before Cliffs of Madness, giving an even greater advantage in any future fights. Although it should be added that the run no longer had much fighting due to all the skips.
It was really close.
The bridge was jumped over, as usual. EXE did a variation of this skip where he used a blade's long jump to get over to the other side.
Come on. Oh, close.
In general, he could do this skip faster than Shenminyu since his Poseidon's Rage was still level 1 and the animation of the magic was shorter. For the Architect's Tomb, EXE used a variation of the skip that he had discovered himself. It was easier to perform than the classic method, but slower too. Instead of skipping the entire tomb, it just dropped Kratos to the final room of the level early.
Got it.
It seems EXE still hadn't learned a good setup for the vertical spike pillars. His movement was hesitant, and for a reason. The slightest contact with spikes would drop Kratos down the entire pillar. Being on world record pace, you could feel the pressure here. There was another Blackout Glitch near the end of the run to get past the Gravedigger cutscene. It was one of the more difficult skips in this route, as it required you to precisely land on ground near the grave without activating the cutscene. EXE missed the mark, causing him a 20 to 30 second time loss, almost at the finishing
Oh
line.
my god.
EXE dealt with Ares using Army of Hades level 3 and Blade of Artemis. It was a short but chaotic fight. It's a pity that Rage of the Gods wasn't available to speed things up. You could only refill Rage by fighting, and Kratos had barely fought any enemies since his encounter with the Hydra. Rematch against Ares had the potential to be very short in this category, but it had a bit of randomness to it. Often runners would retry from last checkpoint if they didn't get the perfect starting attack from Ares. And that was God of War completed in 1:44:34. It was clearly the most polished real-time run anyone had done of God of War at that time. EXE certainly was happy with it.
I got it. I got it. I got it. I got it. I got it.
But during this time, there was someone watching from the sidelines in discontentment. That was me. I had helped EXE with some of the run's tricks when he was starting out, but eventually his progress became slower and slower since he practiced and did runs of all the 3 games in the main series. Besides having his effort divided over 3 different games, it didn't help that EXE had originally learned the route for God of War from many older videos showcasing out-of-date tactics. I recall pestering EXE about known improvements in his chat, but it seemed hard getting through to him. He was knee-deep in the grind, in that extremely focused state of mind where it's hard seeing the forest for the trees. I'm not sure at what point I started practicing runs, but I do remember I made progress fast, since I knew the game so well from all the years of glitching. Just a day or 2 after EXE got his 144, I uploaded my first run using the new route, taking the world record by 7 minutes. During the next month I uploaded 5 more runs, each slightly faster than before due to better playing as well as some additional skips I managed to incorporate into the routes. On 13th of December 2014, I had taken the world record down to 124.57. Like EXE, I had also played on easy mode with the Tychonius costume. This run category, any % New Game Plus, would be the most popular category for all the runners in the years to come. I preferred starting the Hydra 1 fight with a strong attack from a roll. Kratos took a hit while doing this, but it also made a good dent to the Hydra's life bar. A way to skip Hydra 2 was already known since 2012, but it was very finicky. Regardless, I incorporated this trick into the routes. You had to get a harpy to fly over the railing at the back of the area by blocking its swooping attack at a specific time while doing a jump. You could then do a fairly effective magicless high jump by grabbing the harpy through the railing, allowing you to get to the next area early. Worst part was that this trick was hard to do consistently. On this run I only got it on my 4th try. After climbing the mast, I used another skip to get to the end of AKheon early. This trick was found by Satvara in 2008 already, but until now it was deemed unwise to use in runs. The skip made it possible to never fight Big Hydra, but you would also skip the universally handy damage dealing and high jumping magic Poseidon's Rage in the process. From now on, runners would simply have to forego this magic. There wasn't much floor out of bounds, so I played the trick particularly safe, which cost me some time. Overall, it only took me around 5 minutes to get through AKheon, and it wasn't even a very optimal performance. As a side note, according to the narrator, the Hydra died even though Kratos mostly avoided it. Perhaps it choked to death while eating the boat captain. At the port of Athens, I did the sex minigame, upgraded blades to level 2, and then started early swimming glitch, as usual. My air swimming route to Medusa was streamlined compared to EXE. I only hit the essential loading triggers instead of following the path Kratos normally takes through the level. Besides that, I made sure to hit the trigger for the Minotaur fight that was on the walkway. For some reason, the fight couldn't fully start at the moment, so hitting the trigger only made the background music change for the time being. As for what was my reason for doing this, it would become apparent soon. After acquiring Medusa's gaze and regenerating magic, the next step was to backtrack to the port of Athens. Perhaps Kratos had left something important there. The trigger for the previously skipped Cyclops fight still existed near the elevator, and there was no easy way to get around it from here, so you had to watch a short cutscene before you could leave. The Minotaur fight on the walkway no longer existed thanks to hitting its trigger earlier while swimming, making it faster to backtrack the rest of the way. You probably already guessed what's coming next. Kratos needed to breach the water surface one more time. This time a glitch called Lenient Air Momentum, or LAM for short, was used to do this. If you cancel an air attack by landing on ground or water, there will be some leftover positive momentum that will make Kratos' next jump much floatier. As a mysterious side effect, if you have Lamb and then do the attack Apollo's Offensive with a low roof above Kratos' head, Kratos will pass through water surface while descending. Anyway, it was time to go swimming again. It turns out there was actually nothing stopping Kratos from returning back to the pier and starting the swimming glitch again after getting regenerating magic, allowing him to freely coast through the early game. The biggest thing you had to worry about was hitting all the invisible loading triggers while doing this. The camera works in a fairly strange way while swimming in air. The camera angle doesn't update automatically while swimming through areas. However, pressing select forces the game to update the camera, so I sometimes enter the pause menu just to fix the camera angle. Gates of Athens were skipped by swimming past them. Some story cutscenes were skipped. The puzzle room and the pile of rubble were skipped. You could also cut a lot of corners on the road to Athens by swimming over the buildings. God of War attempted to minimize loading screens by making new maps load seamlessly during gameplay. However, if you went through the levels too fast, every once in a while there would necessarily be several seconds of mandatory loading time. In a speedrun, you could use the wait for upgrading your gear, a small optimization that saved seconds here and there. Swimming past the early game was pretty much a necessity when skipping Poseidon's Rage. It was hard to gain a significant amount of height with Blades of Chaos alone, so without the swimming glitch, some of the early game skips would have been either slower or impossible to do. Athens town square was skipped faster than ever before. Cutscenes and fights, both outside and inside the Temple of the Oracle, were skipped. The poor Oracle in need of rescue was also ruthlessly swam past. The swimming glitch was finally ended in the sewers of Athens. It was possible to continue swimming all the way to the desert, but Kratos would get stuck there since there was no way to damage the sirens while swimming. Orb collecting was speeded up by a new exploit. If you destroyed a stone-frozen enemy using Plume of Prometheus, both the melee attack as well as the explosion left by it would shatter the enemy simultaneously, granting Kratos twice the red orbs. At least 3,000 red orbs were needed before the end of the desert to upgrade Medusa's Gaze to level 2, and this was the new best way to go about it. Since Poseidon's Rage jumps were no longer an option, this route relied on a new jump tactic called Blade of Artemis Flash Jump. On the plus side, flash jumps were faster and more nimble than Poseidon's Rage jumps. The thing with Poseidon's Rage was that it completely reset Kratos' air momentum whenever it was cast. Gorgon Flash did no such thing, thus making things like Kratos' speed and angle, as well as the timing of your Blade of Artemis swipes, far more important than before. The weapon system was fairly rigid in the original God of War. Especially airborne weapon switching was limited. However, there existed something called Fuse Glitch, which allowed Kratos to momentarily switch back to Blades of Chaos during a Blade of Artemis air combo. This glitch gave flash jumps a tremendous amount of flexibility. You'd have the benefits of both of Kratos' weapons in air. You could use a double jump in the middle of a flash jump to change directions, or you could use any Blades of Chaos air moves like Hermes' Stomp to finish off your jump. This was truly the Swiss Army knife of jumps, useful for both long and high jumps of any size. After picking up the key item of Challenge of Atlas, a new skip was used, Backwards Challenge of Atlas. This was different from the old Backwards Challenge of Atlas. This literally meant that after picking up the key item, you went back out of the challenge the way you came from. As for why, there was a 2-minute pre-rendered cutscene at the exit. It was faster to leave the wrong way than watch this cutscene in real-time runs. The worst part about this trick was having to breach the floor to return back to the area with Gorgons. You had to jump on one of the ceiling planks in the adjacent corridor and, with limited visibility, land on a specific spot, and then jump and attack while having a good enough positive vertical air momentum. You could get this trick consistent with enough practice, but I was still feeling a bit uncertain about it. Luckily, I still got it first try on this run. After that, the hard part was over. However, I played the rest of the way quite slow and safe, since the last checkpoint was before doing the ceiling breach. You could combine fuse jumps with lenient air momentum by preceding the jump with an interrupted air attack. This made Kratos' next jump very floaty, making him gain height much more effectively and longer than normal. Small movement optimizations were used while swimming. Doing a grab in the middle of a swim dash preserved Kratos' momentum in a strange way, allowing him to move further with a single dash. You could also charge up for the next swim dash while doing a grab. One thing that stands out to me about God of War is how it has such a large variety of different speed tech. Yet another new mechanics oddity was used to save time at the challenge of Hades' pool. Entering and exiting the pool in a specific way, you could have Kratos leap upwards at a really high speed, skipping several seconds of ladder climbing. Since I didn't have to use Rage of the Gods against the big Hydra, I could use it now to get past the archer rope in the most direct possible way, saving a good amount of time. I upgraded Blade of Artemis to level 2, since I could do so during various loading times without really losing any time from it. This helped speed up the final phase of Pandora's Guardian. The Cliffs of Madness bridge skip was faster than it had ever been thanks to fuse jumps. Afterwards, I also skipped the several minutes long pre-rendered cutscene that was placed on the way to the next area. This fuse jump was a bit tricky since you had very few visual cues to tell if your jumping angle was good and also at what point it was safe to return back inbounds. Still, one unpleasant jump was worth doing to skip a whole 2-minute pre-rendered cutscene. I had devised a different setup for the Pandora's box skip. I first high jumped over the door leading to the box, and from there did a lamb fuse jump over the walls of the room, dropping into the elevator shaft early. It was a difficult skip for more than one reason, but I still personally preferred it over the older variation with seam walking. I'd taken the time to figure out a setup to get through the vertical spike pillars decently fast. Although I roughly knew the patterns of the spikes, this was still a hair-raising moment since I had to move diagonally through some tight gaps between the spikes. No runner liked this part. The pack of Hades satyrs was dealt with level 2 Army of Hades and Blade of Artemis. I interrupted the last hit of my combos with a block to try to be slightly more efficient. Also, I escaped the fight arena with flash jumps before defeating all the enemies for a minor time save. Near the end, I managed to do the harder of the 2 Blackout Glitches and skipped the Gravedigger cutscene. I had pondered about upgrading Army of Hades to level 3, but it would have probably cost some time overall, since upgrading it to full took almost 40 seconds, and you would have inevitably had to do some of that upgrading outside loading time. I used a very aggressive tactic against Ares. I focused on hitting him with a specific high damage Blade of Artemis combo, and only used Army of Hades as a counterattack to prevent Kratos from getting stunned. Kratos took a lot of damage with this approach, leaving him near dead at a few points, but you would get health refills at set points when damaging Ares, so Kratos was basically safe as long as you kept hurting Ares fast enough. Against the clones, I preferred using single circle swipes, since it instantly killed one. But you had to be careful, since Kratos would hug his family instead of doing an attack if you were too close to them. I mentioned earlier how the late 2012 and early 2013 was like a glitching renaissance for God of War. The ideas from that time were now finally fully incorporated into the routes. Fuse jumps were a great upgrade over the classic Poseidon's Rage jumps, but they were also more technical to use, increasing the run's overall difficulty. While my playing was sometimes too careful or otherwise rough, the run was still a pretty good demonstration of the new routes, with no really major mistakes. Having reached my goal, I returned back to the sidelines, leaving the future of God of War speedrunning in the hands of EXE and other runners. Somewhere around this time, the God of War series finally got its own leaderboard for real-time runs. Some new runners also jumped into the fray, most prominently Sir Sanju, although he generally focused on the PSP God of Wars. For the first time since the very early years, God of War actually had an active speedrunning community, even if small. EXE practiced for a few weeks and then resumed doing runs using the new routes. He got his time down to around 1:30 at first, and on 9th of March 2015 he did a run in 1:24:46, just barely taking back the world record.
Record! Woo! World record!
1.5 weeks later, it was God of War's 10-year anniversary. Games Done Quick and Santa Monica Studios did a small special marathon event called God of War Done Quick to celebrate the occasion. 3 of the world's best God of War speedrunners were invited to the event, EXE, Sir Sanju as well as me. Or to put it another way, there were only 3 active God of War runners in the world and they invited all of them. And only 2 of them made it to the marathon. It's just a pity that the God of War franchise has in the past been pretty cursed regarding the speedrunning side of things. The very idea to celebrate God of War with a speedrun marathon seemed downright ironic if you knew anything about the history of God of War speedrunning. All of us runners at the time exclusively played the fastest possible categories on easy mode with glitches. The skill set required to perform these runs had very little overlap with the skill set of playing God of War normally. There was no meaningful combat, and large parts of the gameplay were mangled unrecognizable by the myriads of glitches. I wasn't sure if this was really appealing to the core fanbase of God of War. Maybe I'm just being cynical. Uphill battle for the organizers or not. It was interesting to hear some developer feedback on the tricks. EXE got the most difficult skips first try and might have even been on world record pace a part of the run, but sadly he made some big mistakes too, like dying at Pandora's Guardian. In the end, EXE finished his run in 1:28:26. And the marathon as a whole collected some $3,500 to the Able Gamers Foundation. On 11th of May 2015, EXE was in the middle of a new run that was going great. He had played well and also used some new optimizations, like a better route through the vertical spike pillars.
New world record, yeah! New world record! Woohoo! Oh my god! Oh my god!
The final time was 1:23:32. The rest of the year was uneventful. But in 2016, a bombshell hit the God of War speedrunning community. A popular Brazilian YouTuber called Victor Kratos started speedrunning God of War. His first relevant highlight was probably this video from 11th of March 2016, where he completed the game in 2:51. Over the following months, he tried out numerous categories across all the God of War games and inspired some of his hundreds of thousands of subscribers to join in. Many new runners from Brazil started playing God of War, causing the community to explode in size. Such a cataclysmic change brought with it both good and bad. Many of the Brazilian players weren't adept in English, communicating mainly or exclusively in Portuguese. The language barrier was sometimes a problem, especially in the communication between moderators and the runners. Some early runs had to be rejected for not following the rules, and in worst cases, insults were said to have been hurled as a result. An American player called Ragno started streaming God of War towards the end of 2016, and he eventually became a lead moderator on the God of War leaderboards. His interactions with the Brazilian community were generally friendly, but he did note that a lot of the runs were captured on video camera with no splits, which took some getting used to. Things stabilized during the next months. The leaderboard's moderator team was expanded and new run categories were established. Aside the ever-popular Any% New Game Plus, a noticeable subset of the new players were interested in various types of glitchless categories. The community was thriving, everything was good and right in the world. Perhaps the curse had finally been lifted. Around the end of 2016, EXE, who for the past 2 years had more or less been the face of the God of War speedrunning community, stopped streaming God of War. He rebranded his channel and started exclusively doing couples streams with his wife Carrie. I asked him about it for this video, and he said that there were many reasons for this change. For one, he said that he normally switches the game he runs about once a year, so after almost 3 years of God of War speedruns, he felt like change was in order. He also said that he finds the couples streams funnier to do at the moment. Regarding the future, EXE said that it's not impossible he might return one day, but only to running the original God of War, since it is his favorite speedrun. I'm going to spoil a little bit of the past future at this point. Since the community had grown in size so much, from 2017 on, there were a lot of new records being made. The one who finally ended EXE's reign on God of War was Castor GoW, who managed to do a 122 run on 22nd of December 2016. Over the next half a year, he did 2 more runs and took the time down to 1:20:26. For the rest of 2017, 2 runners competed for the world record, Milo Games and the Danish speedrunner ThaRixer. They traded the world record back and forth for a while, and in the process the run's final time was lowered to around 1:17. So I thought about which of these runs I should take a closer look on this video. At this point, the route and the gameplay of the top runners was getting really optimized. Most of the runs from now on would contain the same tricks, same navigation, same upgrade routes, only squeezed to a sterile perfection. There wasn't much room for the runner's personality or fun new route ideas to show anymore. However, even in this increasingly homogeneous environment, I did notice 2 runs which especially stood out. This is the 3rd run Castor made in 2017, with the final time of 1:20. His runs from this time showcased plenty of small innovations that most later runners of the game would also adapt. For instance, Castor started the first fight with a plume of Prometheus and then proceeded to use the T1 combo to defeat the Legionnaires instead of using grabs. This was another tactic that only made sense in this specific category. Castor's setup for the first Hydra made it easy to do a spirit combo finisher to it for some extra damage after it was stunned. Castor used a faster setup for skipping the final Hydra fights. Instead of carefully positioning Kratos by using the mast, Castor jumped down early and positioned Kratos during the fall instead. You could deduce where to land by watching where the ropes on the deck were lining up to. It was possible to skip the small intro at Pandora's temple's yard by high jumping over it. This was a fairly old trick from 2008, but it was only now adapted to be a part of the new route. Instead of Poseidon's Rage, the runner had to use lenient air momentum to gain enough height for the high jump. A new route was used in Challenge of Atlas when doing the first skips there. Castor jumped to the left side of the pit and then backtracked a little bit to hit the loading trigger for the next room, saving some extra seconds. Many of the fuse jumps were optimized further. For instance, the Blades of Hades skip was done using a fuse jump from Ascension instead of taking up an extra second to set up lenient air momentum. And when it came time to do really big jumps and lenient air momentum had to be set up, Castor did so seamlessly as a part of navigation. A normal viewer might not have even noticed that something weird was being done with Kratos' momentum here, besides the usual fuse jump antics, of course. Anyway, Castor used a different route to do the Cliffs of Madness bridge skip. The bridge itself was completely ignored, and the high jump instead aimed to reach the elevator early. However, Kratos still had to backtrack past the ropes to hit an essential loading trigger afterwards. Pretty much all the runners after EXE ditched my needlessly complex Pandora's box skip setup and went back to the ones that ThaRixer had discovered back in the day. It wasn't easy to do since it featured seam walking, but at least the last checkpoint was close by in case of failure. Some high-level optimizations like ladder and rope jumps were slowly but surely being introduced into real-time runs. A single missed jump would drop Kratos all the way down. In my opinion, this run is a good demonstration of the Any% New Game Plus route from mid-2017, an earnest step into even deeper optimization of both navigation and skips. With his series of runs, Castor spent around 7 months being the world record holder in this category, until Milo Games took the first place in July 2017. The second run I wanted to talk about was the 117 run made by ThaRixer. He was originally inspired to learn the game after seeing Sir Sanju play it at the European Speedrunner Assembly 2017. He made a lot of progress quick. In just a few weeks, he had attained what could only be called mastery over the game and its techniques. Due to the high concentration of random or difficult skips in the first section of the game, some runners started calling it the Reset C. To be on world record pace, you had to get all the tricks here first or second try. ThaRixer had a really strong start to the run, getting everything first try. A new trick allowed saving couple of extra seconds during the big swimming glitch. If you hit the loading trigger for the sewers map and then swam back to the previous level transition while remaining out of bounds, the game would send Kratos to the next map regardless. ThaRixer used a subtle navigation optimization. Taking out Medusa's gaze would let Kratos cancel out of a roll fairly quickly. It was a good alternative to jump cancelling out of rolls. ThaRixer had found a new skip that saved around 20 seconds. While climbing the ladder to Challenge of Poseidon, you could skip an additional cutscene by jumping around its trigger. As a side effect, the large rolling stone would not disappear from the middle ring, and the player might get crushed by it by accident later. Runners after me and EXE would do the Blackout Glitch here without any extra setup. They would just roll into the cutscene trigger, upgrade blades to level 3, and then retry before the cutscene has the time to start. Fumbling with the buttons and being too slow with your input would be a 30-second time loss at least. ThaRixer's mid-game was really strong. After defeating Pandora's Guardian, he was 45 seconds ahead of his previous best time. ThaRixer had figured out a new and improved pattern for getting past the first vertical spike pillar quickly and safely. This was a welcome discovery for any future runners of God of War.
That was sketchy.
There were actually two schools of thoughts on how to beat Ares the fastest in this category. ThaRixer used the same approach that I had used, where Army of Hades was only cast as a counterattack. But his fiercest rival, Milo Games, prioritized the casting of Army of Hades, using it whenever available. I can't say for sure which is the best approach. It could just be a matter of preference. ThaRixer really applied himself with God of War, doing the research, finding some improvements, and in general learning the game well enough to do the world's first sub-118 run, all in a relatively short amount of time. He was so happy with this time that he quit running God of War. Regarding the future, ThaRixer has said that he prefers moving on to new speed games, since it's more fresh and interesting to him that way. But you never know if he might return one day.
1:17:57. This is the greatest speedrun I've ever done.
While ThaRixer thought that his run would stay as the record for a very long time, Milo Games did a 1:17:40 run around 2 weeks later, just barely taking back the record. Before I reveal the top 3 runners of God of War's most popular and fastest category, any % New Game Plus on PlayStation 3, I should take a moment to stress something important. It is a common misconception among some people that a run like this is easy, simply because it is played on easy mode with glitches. But a sentiment like this couldn't be further from the truth. As evidence, I would like to present to you some shocking testimonies.
It's by far the hardest game I have ever learned. And I have learned quite a few speedrun routes.
I think it's the hardest out of the 3 main games.
The easiest is God of War 3 any % New Game Plus. The most difficult without a doubt is God of War 1 any % New Game Plus.
That's a good question. I have run so many different games. I usually always say God of War 1 was the hardest to run.
I apologize if these descriptions of the run's difficulty were too graphic, but it was necessary to drive home the point that God of War is indeed a challenging speed game. Getting a time of 1:20 or thereabouts is not a simple task. Everyone who has reached this time has worked hard to get there, so to all you runners who spent hours learning the tricks, felt the frustration of failed runs, but persevered and got a time in this game only a very small number of people have ever reached. To you I will now collectively impart my highest commendation. Nice. Now the final boss of this video, the current world record run 1:14:24 by Castor. Let's go. Castor fought the first 2 fights using the same efficient tactics he had used in his 1:20. He got the Hydra 2 skip on second attempt. He got the box skip on first attempt. The big Hydra was skipped quick and smooth. After doing the sex minigame, he upgraded blades and started early swimming to get to Medusa fast. He managed to get a good juggle on Medusa and won the fight quick. He escaped the tutorial afterwards, gaining endlessly regenerating magic. He backtracked to the port of Athens, starting swimming glitch a second time. He swam past all fights and other obstacles in the early game. He skipped the desert sirens on third attempt. Castor reintroduced this classic skip into the new route, except it was now done without Poseidon's Rage. Looks difficult. He defeated the Siren boss fight in a flash, using Gorgon Flash. He skipped the Pandora's Temple yard intro, followed by skipping the rest of the yard. New skip. Castor introduced Satvara's Pandora's Temple lobby skip into the route. Very tricky to pull off, hence no one had used it in runs prior to this. This influenced the orb route too, forcing Castor to open one extra red orb chest later on. Castor skipped everything in Challenge of Atlas using the same route he had used in his 120. He got backwards Challenge of Atlas floor breach second try. Afterwards, he escaped the challenge by jumping directly over the gates, saving a bunch of time. He did the rolling stone skip and subsequent cutscene skip on the ladder on second try, possibly biggest single mistake in the run. He skipped first Cerberus encounter with Blackout Glitch. The sacrifice section was dealt with as is customary. After getting the trident, Castor did the big jump out of the area on first try. New skip. Castor clipped out of Challenge of Poseidon from an earlier point, cutting down on all the swimming you had to do. This one was also by Satvara. The rest of the challenge was skipped by swimming out of bounds. Castor had some bad luck before going to Challenge of Hades. The rolling stone he had skipped earlier was still rolling around and had to be jumped over. First half of Challenge of Hades was skipped with a single high jump, as usual. The Archer rope was skipped using Rage of the Gods. Blades of Hades was skipped with a Blade of Artemis jump. Most of the Pandora's Guardian fight was skipped with a log shooting device exploit. Army of Hades tutorial was escaped with 2 jumps. Castor had bad luck with the Rolling Stone a second time while aligning the rings, just a little bit before leaving for the upper Pandora's Temple. He got the shortcuts and skips at Cliffs of Madness, including the big bridge skip, first try. The Architect's Tomb was skipped without mercy. Finding Pandora's box was skipped like before. New skip. You might have noticed looking at the leaderboards that there was a gap of 2 to 3 minutes between the top 3 runners and everyone else. This was because all the top 3 runs had used a fairly new discovery to save a full 3 minutes. It was possible to skip the long pre-rendered cutscene of Kratos ending up in Hades fairly reliably with specific inputs. Hades satyrs were fought with Blade of Artemis and Army of Hades as usual. Castor managed to do the second Blackout Glitch too. As a result, Kratos never exchanged a single word with the mysterious Gravedigger character during the run. Castor used a type of a hybrid strategy against Ares. He started the fight with Army of Hades, but afterwards only used the magic as a counterattack. Nothing surprising happened at the clones. He got the perfect luck in Ares refights. And that is the current world record in God of War. Generally top-notch playing, as well as a few daring additions like the Pandora's Temple lobby skip and the faster Challenge of Poseidon swimming glitch. While it's still not honed to absolute perfection, it won't be an easy run to beat. Alright, that was the video. Hopefully it was interesting seeing how the speedruns of this game have evolved over the years. I'm not sure if I'll continue doing videos like this regularly, since they're very time-consuming to make, and honestly I would rather break games. But if I do continue, the next speedrun history will probably be God of War 2. I'd appreciate it if you left some feedback and told me if there's something you'd like to see done differently. Thanks for watching.